I've been deep in development on Synth Beasts, my open world creature collecting game, and we're getting closer to something really exciting. That is the Kickstarter launch, and part of that is putting together a demo so that you can all get your hands on the game. But a little while back, I hit a bit of a wall actually. I was looking at the demo build, the one that I was planning to release for the Kickstarter, and I had this sinking feeling. It just wasn't ready. My indie game had problems, and today I want to talk about how we tackled that head on. Now, when I say problems, I don't mean the game was fundamentally broken. It ran, you can play it, the core ideas were there, but it felt loose, like a piece of IKEA furniture where all the screws are in place, but none of them are quite tightened. There were bugs, sure, little annoying things, but also bigger design decisions that just didn't feel fully cohesive. It wasn't the experience that I wanted people to have as their first impression before a Kickstarter. I knew I had to tighten those screws, and the best way to figure out exactly which screws needed tightening, and by how much? Well, of course, playtesting. Real feedback from real players. Some of you who follow the channel might remember that strange video that I put out about a month ago, and that was actually to get playtesters for the Synth Beast demo. And honestly, the response really blew me away. I got over 200 applications. Seriously, thank you so much to everybody who showed interest. That alone was really motivating. So once that video was out, the plan was simple. Send the demo build out to these awesome players and gather feedback. But I decided not to send it to all 200 people at once. Instead, I staggered the invitations, and there was a really crucial reason for doing this. Imagine if I sent out the build to everybody on day one, and imagine there was a really common and maybe even game-breaking bug or a core design flaw that almost everybody immediately pointed out. If everybody experienced that same initial brokenness, I'd fix it, but then who would test out the fix? I'd have essentially used up my entire pool of fresh eyes on that first flawed version of the game, and it would have been a complete waste of valuable feedback. So what I did is I adopted an iterative approach. I sent out the first batch of invites, got the initial wave of feedback, and immediately started patching. Almost every single day I was pushing updates to the build, fixing bugs, changing design related stuff, based on what players were saying, and then after each significant patch, I sent out another wave of accepting emails to a new group of testers from the initial application pool. I am so glad that I did it this way, because yeah, there were quite a few bugs and some core design issues that popped up early on. But because I was patching constantly and staggering the testers, I could fix an issue, then send the updated build to a new group who had never seen the previous version, and that meant that I could actually verify if my fixes worked, if the design changes felt better, and all of this without the bias of having played an earlier build. We went through about 10 of these major feedback rounds, and it was intense because I was patching almost daily and processing the feedback, but it went incredibly well. The demo was completely transformed throughout this process. So let me walk you through some of the biggest changes we made thanks directly to the playtesters. So the first big one, creature capturing. Synth Beast is a creature collector, right? Capturing monsters is the core. So in the initial demo version, you had to reach a specific, somewhat arbitrary point on the first main island to unlock the ability to capture creatures. Now on paper, maybe that sounds okay, but it was actually a leftover artifact from before the game went fully open world. Originally, the game started you on that island, and you were essentially locked there until you completed its main objectives, including passing the point where you gained the capture ability. But a few months ago, I made the leap to a proper open world. You get a ship early on in the game, and then with that, the ocean is yours to explore, and that's how the open world aspect of the game works. And this meant that players could technically leave that first island much earlier. I initially thought this wouldn't be a huge issue because I'd placed some intentional limiters, like for example, your starting creature doesn't have a projectile attack at all, and the way off the immediate starting area requires hitting a switch with a projectile, so I figured the players would naturally progress to the first island, get the capture ability, catch a monster with a projectile, and then be able to truly explore the rest of the game. And actually, that worked. For about 90% of players, so not 100%. Most players followed the visual cues towards the main island path, but the remaining 10%, they'd start exploring immediately, maybe miss the main path, get a bit lost out in the open sea or on the small islands, and crucially, they couldn't capture any new monsters. They didn't even know what they were supposed to be doing, and the core loop of the game, given that it's a creature collector, felt completely broken and inaccessible to them. For that 10%, the beginning of the game genuinely felt very bad. So what was the fix to this? Maybe it sounds kind of simple and obvious in retrospect, but it was to let players capture monsters right from the beginning Just no questions asked. Sounds very simple, right? Well, yes and no. Implementing it was straightforward, but it had really big knock-on effects. I had to completely reevaluate and change the monster spawns across the entire demo area because there were certain monsters with projectile attacks available near the start that, if caught immediately, would allow players to skip significant chunks of the intended early game without even realizing it. So I carefully recurated the initial monster pool, making sure that early captures made sense, and that change, combined with the recent addition of a map showing the nearby islands, completely resolved that early game confusion. Now everybody understands the core loop of creature capturing much better. However, apart from the creature capturing, another big change involved the shop system. In the build the first batch of players got, the shop wasn't introduced until the very end of the demo, so it was basically useless. In the context of the full game, where the demo only represents maybe 10% of the content, introducing the shop later makes sense as a part of the overall progression. But for a demo, the thing that's meant to get players to understand and get excited for the full game, it just doesn't really make sense. Players were running around breaking boxes and constantly collecting currency, but they had absolutely nothing to spend on them for potentially 45 minutes or more, and then when they're able to use it, the demo is done. Understandably, people were confused, even a bit frustrated, like, why am I collecting all this currency if it does nothing? In retrospect, this makes perfect sense. Fortunately, the solution here was pretty direct. Based on tester feedback, I simply added a shop earlier, placing one on the first main island, and players could now spend their currency much sooner on useful items and upgrades and kind of engage with the economy of the game. And that immediately made collecting currency feel meaningful right from the start. I think this was a great lesson in how something that might be a non-issue in the grand scale of a full game can be a significant point of friction in a demo, which needs to establish the core loops and rewards as quickly as possible. Other than that though, the third major change, one that honestly kind of surprised me a bit, but it kind of made sense once I thought about it, was actually the intro cutscene and the personality test. I'm a huge fan of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, and I love how they start with that personality quiz that determines your starting Pokemon. It gives you agency almost immediately, and right from the first second of gameplay, you kind of have an impact on the game. I wanted to capture that feeling in Synth Beasts, but with my own twist. Instead of determining your character, the personality test in Synth Beasts subtly affects some story moments based on your answers. At first, I had about 10 questions, similar in length to the Mystery Dungeon quizzes, but quite a few testers felt that this was just too many. It was too long before they got into the actual gameplay, even though it only took about 1 minute to answer them. My best guess is that the players going into a Pokemon game have years of context. They understand the world, the creatures, and they have some sort of idea of what the outcome of such a quiz might be. It feels familiar, but for Synth Beast, which is a brand new IP from my really small indie studio, players don't have that context. 10 questions feels like a bit of an interrogation, to be honest, without knowing the potential outcomes. I still really like the concept though, and I really want to keep it, so I took the feedback and cut the number of questions down from 10 to 5. Fortunately, that seemed to do the trick. Players still got that immediate sense of agency and shaped their journey through their initial questions, but without the feeling of being bogged down before the adventure even started. Beyond these 3 big examples, there were also tons of smaller changes that came out of this playtest. Lots of bug fixes, of course, things like UI elements not really displaying correctly on certain aspect ratios like the Steam Deck, but we also added quality of life features like clear visual and audio cues for when you're low on health, so you don't have to constantly glance up at the corner of your screen. We tweaked game feel, like reducing the number of hits needed to break boxes down from 3 to 2, and even added an equipable item that can lower it further just to 1 hit, so there's just so many little things that collectively smoothed out the experience. Another crazy insight that came out of this playtest was the amount of playtime that players were putting into the demo. I played through this demo so many times, and of course I could probably 100% everything in about 20 minutes, maybe 15, maybe 25. So I estimated that the average player might take about 30 minutes to see most of the game. Not even 100%ing it, just, playing through it and doing things at their own pace. But I was so wrong. The average playtime reported by testers, now this is the average, it was 65 minutes. Not even 100%ing it. That was just to beat it. And that also includes the people who didn't even finish the demo. That's quite crazy. There were even some dedicated players who spent up to 2 hours 100% of the game. It was a real eye-opener. It really drove home the point that playing your own game is a terrible way to gauge how others will experience it, not just in terms of difficulty or how they approach the gameplay, but even in something as basic as how long it takes them to explore and actually complete the content. So before, I thought the full game would take maybe 5 to 8 hours to beat, but I almost wonder now if the number is closer to 15 or 25 hours. I'm not sure, but I was definitely super surprised. Either way, this whole process of refining the demo really crystallized my game design philosophy for Synth Beasts, especially in relation to how the game begins. I'm a huge believer in the design of the Great Plateau from Zelda Breath of the Wild. I think it's arguably one of the best starting areas in any game ever. And I believe this because it drops you right into the core gameplay, teaches you the essential mechanics and systems just through exploration and experimentation, and acts as a perfect microcosm for the entire game world, just on a smaller scale. The rules and assumptions that you learn on the Great Plateau hold true for the vast majority of the rest of the game, and that's why it's so fantastic. And that's exactly what I wanted to achieve with the Synth Beast demo. The area you explore in the demo, that's kind of Synth Beast's Great Plateau. It's a piece of the world designed to teach you everything that you need to know for the rest of the game. When you start the demo, you of course start off with the personality test that we talked about, then a quick moment of teaching you how to do basic interactions like breaking boxes, and then almost immediately after, you get your ship and you have access to the open world. You can technically go anywhere within the demo's boundaries at this point. Of course, as I explained earlier, you hit a small progression gate related to the capturing of a creature with a projectile at a certain point, but once you're past that, the core gameplay fully opens up, kind of exactly like how Breath of the Wild does it. And to really make sure that you can experience the full breadth of mechanics in this demo, I made certain decisions like making sure that you can find enough heart pieces to forge a full extra heart container in this demo area. You can also find enough feather pieces to increase your healing capacity, which is kind of like our version of Hollow Knight's soul system. And you can also collect many gizmos, which is kind of like an equipable item, to the point where you actually have to start thinking and making meaningful decisions about your build and which gizmos to equip using your limited notches. So it's all there. Exploration, combat, capturing, progression, customization, a true taste of what the full game offers. A microcosm like the Great Plateau. So all the feedback, all the iteration, and all the daily patches, it all helps steer the demo towards this goal that I had in mind, making it a truly representative, polished, and engaging microcosm of the full Synth Beasts experience. Of course, there's still lots to do, but I think that this process brought the demo where it needed to be for the Kickstarter launch. And that brings me to the really exciting news. After all of this work, fueled by the invaluable player feedback, I'm super excited to announce that the Synth Beast Kickstarter campaign is officially going live on May 7th. And yes, the very demo that I spent all this time refining will be releasing on that same day, May 7th. So you can all jump in, experience it for yourself, and hopefully you enjoy it. The Kickstarter itself is going to have tons of awesome rewards, like some stuff is making your own Synth Beasts, collaborating and designing with us to make a boss fight, or even helping build and design an entire island for all the other players to experience in the game itself. So if capturing creatures, sailing an open ocean, and customizing your abilities sounds like your kind of game, please check out the link in the description below for the Kickstarter. You can follow the campaign right now to be notified the moment it goes live on May 7th, and that's the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you again to all the amazing playtesters. The game is so much better thanks to all of you, and I really can't wait for the rest of you to play Synth Beasts and check out the Kickstarter. So, see you next time. Bye.